Hi, and welcome to the Wellbeing Show. I'm your host, Noel McDermott. I'm joined by a great guy this evening, Simon, who's joining us from Portugal. And I have to say this, my techie James was surprised that you were on the same timeline. I had to explain to him that we live in a globe, but the world is not flat like in the books that you open up. So James has now discovered that the world is round, which is good. It's good to learn things. But welcome, Simon. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
How are you doing? How's your day been?
Yeah, no, all good, all good. As you say, I'm in Portugal at the moment, so I'm blessed with some blue skies today. Summer's come early, and so it's been a great day, and very much looking forward to having this chat with you.
Great. Have you noticed the influx of millions of British holiday makers? Because Portugal is on the green list.
Yes, indeed. I think we're the only country in Europe now with sun and blue skies. So I think alleged we had about 5,000 people turn up yesterday.
Yeah. I was surprised it was so low, but yeah, so sort of it's going to be a home from home in some ways for you. Maybe not such a welcome one, but there you go. Portugal. So, Simon, thanks for sort of taking time to join us. Just so that people know, I mean, this ain't on the marketing, but Simon's a very successful international businessman, has been for sort of many years, has run several companies, and how we met was through one of the companies that he has co-founded called Make a Difference, which is an events company, but specifically promoting best practice within workforce and workplace mental health. Simon was one of the people who got involved before the bandwagon rolled into town, and has a very interesting series of events. And we got to know each other some years ago. I want to get into that with you and how you got into that space, into the mental health space, particularly the workplace mental health space, which obviously is a hot topic at the moment. But before that, I've just been catching up with people, particularly people working in the sort of mental health arena, about how it's been for you for the sort of last year of the pandemic. And I guess also because you're an expat somewhere else, and what that's been like, that experience. So how have you found it? How have you found this last year, Simon?
Well, as you say, I mean, I live in the south of Portugal, so in one way we're quite blessed that there's a low density of population here, and there's certainly we have a garden where we could always go outside, and obviously the weather is fairly temperate, so we've been lucky, or luckier than some, and but it's been tough. My business, just as a slight introduction to everyone, for the last 30 plus years, as long as I care to remember, I've been organising live events, pretty industry agnostically, and pretty much everywhere in the world. So it's been a bit of a double whammy for us. Obviously, there have been no live events. We've had to pivot from a business perspective and do lots of digital virtual events, which some have been successful, and others not necessarily so. It's not my particular favourite, if I'm honest. I got into this business 30 years ago, to shake hands, to see the whites of people's eyes, to really have that sort of personal face-to-face contact with people, which I believe is the way that business should be consumed, and how relationships are forged, both new ones and existing ones. So that's ground to a bit of a halt, which has been tough from a business perspective, and from a personal perspective, it's been a bit of a roller coaster year for me, if I'm brutally honest. We had a tragedy in the family. Sadly, my elder brother passed away on the 15th of December last year. Nothing to do with COVID, but because of COVID, he lived in Dubai all his life. And it was my parents, who are still alive, 90 and 89, and very healthy and together after 60 years. Unfortunately, they couldn't go to his funeral and had to witness that, as many others have. So that had a huge impact, really, I suppose, on all of us, not being able to say goodbye like many others haven't. And I feel that we've soldiered on, if you like. Naturally, that's been very tough. But you know, it's the way of the world. And so personally, it's been a bit of a rough ride, but as for many others as well. But I'm glad to see the light at the end of the tunnel, really, for everyone. And we're certainly going to be having a memorial celebration for my brother Danny, both in the UK and in Portugal, when we can invite lots of friends and family to celebrate his life.
I'm sorry about your loss. It's been a year of loss, hasn't it? I mean, it's sort of really dreadful sort of stuff that we've been seeing. And I think, like you say, the really tough bit about it is we haven't been able to do what we would normally do, which is gather together and support each other in grieving our losses, and we've had to postpone that. So that's been really, really tough, I think. And there's something unique about this experience, which I think we need to somehow encapsulate. I don't know how we're going to do it, but I think over the next few years it will find a way, I think, because it's
one of the things, Noel, that I'm grateful for, if one could be grateful for this horrific situation the world finds itself in, is that, at least for now, in the past, when I first got into the area of mental health, you know, people were quoting in the workplace, at least, that, you know, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people would suffer from an episode of mental ill health. But through this last 18 months, I genuinely, honestly believe, I believed it before, but I'm absolutely certain now that everyone has felt, in some way, shape or form, and in different degrees, some form of an episode of mental ill health, whether that be stress, grief, anxiety, loneliness, whatever it might be on the lower end of the spectrum. We've all suffered is not a word that I would normally use, but I genuinely feel that we have all experienced it. And therefore, hopefully that will in some way make us more empathetic to those that have suffered before, not as a result of this. So it's basically, for me, it's come to the top table. We are at the top table, and I want it to remain there. So if anything good, I don't like to say that has come out of it, is that I think it's brought to the fore that, you know, we all owe it to ourselves to look after our own mental fitness and those around us.
It's also, I think you're right, it is important to find what are the useful things we've learned from this experience as we move forward. Otherwise, we're at risk of holding it as just a wholly negative thing, which will damage us even further. And part of recovery is to sort of see what we can take from experience rather than be sort of victimized and battered by experience. So I'm totally with you. I think in terms of the sort of terminology, it's always fluid in this field. So there's always issues about what words people use. It's highly politicized. So let's just be comfortable with that. A term that I'm sort of comfortable with and familiar with is the idea of psychological distress, which I think moves out of stigmatization. I think people can own they had psychological distress rather than they were mentally ill. There's no difference, in fact, in terms of symptomology. It's the same thing, but it's maybe a more comfortable sort of terminology. And I think everybody will understand the concept of psychological distress from this year. I don't think anybody, except for some very weird Pollyanna people who just refuse to accept there's anything bad in life. And I put those in a unique little box and sort of let them be happy with themselves. But I think you're right. I think it's also, one of the things I noticed early on, I suppose because I'm a mental health professional, was that it was very clear from those, remember those first briefings by the Prime Minister's socially distanced team, and how weird, I found them very odd. And I was like, whoa, this is really serious, isn't it? If this is what's happening.
He was so clear, Noel, wasn't he?
Yeah. I mean, I tend to forgive a lot of people for this year. I think a lot of people sort of dropped a lot of balls, and in the end we picked up and run with it. So in the end it's come all right, but it was rabbits in headlights, I think, in the early days. Not just me, but everybody at every level was I don't know what to do with this. And when you're standing in front of a camera, you sort of have to pretend that you do know what you do.
Yeah.
That's sort of like, I wouldn't have envied being there, I have to say. But I remember at those early press conferences and all the way through, certainly the government ministers were saying this, but the scientists who were epidemiologists and medics, etc., were all very clear that we had to mitigate the psychological stress involved in the public health interventions. And they were very, very clear about that. There was a balance to be struck because the public health interventions were going to cause problems for us as social beings. Because this isolation from community and connection with other people. I know the online world isn't your sort of favourite place, but I imagine it sort of saved your bacon in some ways, because if this had happened 70 years ago, we wouldn't have had that to sort of pivot towards. So what has happened, do you think, in your sphere in terms of sort of just thinking about how it's moved on and what is going to be kept and what is going to be left? Because it's also, in thinking about you as a human being, being a sort of expat, I guess a lot of your life is still in the UK and people that you know and care about. And there's this thing where we've managed to maintain connection with each other through going online, but it is a double-edged sword, isn't it? So I can't imagine, I imagine, I don't know this, I imagine that when this first happened, apart from the normal fear that everybody had, you had this extra one of like, how on earth do I have a career and a business in this world? I mean, it must have been quite frightening, I imagine, sort of in those.
Yeah, I think, in any business, in any, there's cycles, and,
Sure.
people talk about the need to innovate and disrupt, whether that be for the next gen consumer or, technology or trends that were changing, fashion, whatever it might be. I mean, we had to very quickly assess the situation and decide which portfolios of events, live events, obviously, that we wanted to go online, to go digital or hybrid. And the whole industry was working together. I have to say my industry really collaborated well. Venues that we'd signed up to would let us off. People who contracted to us, we gave them the option. We could postpone, we could do a digital event. So we all worked pretty closely together. I think that was part of the great thing about this, that I think different communities just came together. But I mean, I think the sort of like, if technology hadn't been here, then, like 70 years ago, then, I mean, the world would be a totally different place. I mean, people, must be grateful. I mean, Zoom and, Google Meets and everything else. I mean, God knows what would have happened without them, for people just to be in touch. So, technology played, I think, a very important and pivotal role for people's general well-being, not just mental well-being, but, in every way. And we decided very early on that most of my events, I didn't want to do virtual. By the way, just as a quick aside, it showed us all up as live event organisers, because everyone had been talking about doing sort of like streaming, content out from live events to people who couldn't make it for years. But it was, to be honest, it was pretty poor. Both the delivery in terms of broadcast value and content value, and for different reasons. But this has certainly showed us up. I think moving forward in the live events industry, there's no question whatsoever that every live event in the future, certainly for the next 5 years, will have some form of hybrid. We call it hybrid, where we stream out content during the show for those that can't, for travel restrictions, or because they don't choose to travel, can't be there in person. But for me personally, bring back the live event. I need it. I need it so much. I mean, you'd spend a whole year organising this event. Showtime was the time for me. That was the time that, set me alight and got me going. And, I used to walk up and down the aisles of my events feeling incredibly proud that people were, as I say, either, maintaining existing relationships or forging new ones. And I don't think that's changed. But I do think it was very, particularly my children, well, they're not children anymore, they're 23 and 21, but they were in London, and we fortunately got them back here. And so that was a lovely thing, to be honest. I had 7 months with my 20-year-old and my 21-year-old. And I mean, who would have imagined at the age of 23 or 21? I'm sure my children didn't imagine it for a minute, but we had some, really lovely time together, despite the fact that, perhaps after a couple of months they wanted to go back. I had them tracked.
They had no option but to be with dad and play his games. I mean, a lot of people have said that about the family time, for example. That, and actually, oddly enough, a lot of men have said it to me. That particularly men in sort of senior positions in businesses, and there's an ambivalence there, I think, for a lot of guys about the idea of a return to an office space, because there's going to be significant loss involved, which is they've had some great time with their family, being from home and all that sort of stuff, and not doing the commute and the stress of all of that. I mean, I think the reality is those with older kids, they're going back to university and school and stuff like that. So
I think you're right, Noel. I mean, I do believe that, a lot of people, and I wouldn't be the first to say this, that are sort of like reassessing where they are and what they do, and that whole sort of aspect, what do they call it, the work-life balance. But for me now, I think people will not be saying that, they'll be thinking about the life balance, and in fact work should fit into that, so that work-life balance shouldn't really exist. It should be a life balance, and work fits into that. And I think one of the things that employers will have to do moving forward is to be empathetic to that, particularly if they want to retain, the best talent in the market, whether that be new talent or existing talent. I think people will be asking questions. I'm delighted, frankly, that as part of the interview process now, that they will be asking, if I want to work flexi hours, what is your mental health policy or your wellbeing policy at the office? And if they're not hearing the right answers, I'm hoping that fewer graduates that start particularly into the professional industries, like, which are renowned for having some pretty horrific figures in terms of suicide and stress at work, like lawyers, for example, the legal profession. They won't be bought off by saying, well, look, no, we don't do that, but we'll give you a 6-figure salary. Well, that's not enough now. So I think that people are changing, and I think post-COVID, people will be, one has to manage that if you're an employer, and flexi hours, or there's lots of things happening from different employers, and it's all good. It's all, people.
I think so. No, I agree with you. I mean, I think there's a couple of sort of pressures there. One is that no longer, I don't think it's viable any longer for any employer to say we can't do working from home. Because it's not possible. We don't have the systems or structures. I mean, well, that's not true. We can. It's now a choice, and it's a choice that an organisation needs to make, and that an individual needs to make. But also, I think I don't think I'm alone in this. I had to figure out what was important this last year, and what was important were those things that I find life-sustaining, which are the relationships with the people that I love and care about. I mean, there was no doubt about it. And you can't see the picture, but my boy, there's a picture of him when I first saw him. He's not my natural born son, but I sort of brought him into my life, and he's about 5 in the picture. It takes me back to when I first met him. But he was the person that was the most important to me to go and spend time with over this last year. That's what gave meaning and purpose. And I think that has happened for a lot of people, which, without being Pollyanna, is only a good thing.
Yeah. I mean,
really only a good thing.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. But that's not just in life, but I think, I mean, our mission, if you like, with Make a Difference, events and media, which we run all over the world, it is is really, you use the word sustainable, and I think it's a really important part, that the momentum of that has been created as a result of the pandemic should be sustainably maintained, so that, you know, it actually becomes, you know, wellness of your people, your talent, your most important asset, you know, should become a business priority. It should become a critical enabler for, you know, delivering, you know, a team with passion, with better performance, you know, and purpose. That's the other thing, massive purpose, which ultimately will bring profits and retain talent, and, you know, less, without going into all the details of why it's so important in a workplace, you know, in terms of presenteeism and leavism and all the things that we know. The business case is there. It's been proven time and time again, and people are now listening. But there's also the humane part of it, which is, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, why should that be about, oh, by the way, that extra stubborn stain? It should be on top of the list, you know. And it's all.
It is. There's an interesting phenomenon this year, which is that there's been a levelling of experience, a communality of experience, and those that may have felt themselves protected from things like psychological stress or environmental impingement because of their position, have had that experience. And I've heard it again and again from people. I've just lived through something that all of my staff have lived through, and I've never really understood that. And I've heard therapists saying it. My clients were having the same life experiences as me, and that's the first time I've ever experienced that. And there is something there about that sort of leveling and humbling, if you like, of experience, and understanding that, you know, this is all of us.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, and it happily but sadly, it brings me back to the reason that Mark Pigou, my business partner, and I actually founded the business that we're in. As I said earlier, we've been working in exhibitions for 30 odd years. Our place in
but not just working. You were both enormously successful. I say that not to blow smoke up your backside or anything like that. I wouldn't dream of doing that. But it's really interesting that both of you had these epiphanies, which we're going to talk to us about. But as hard-headed businessmen who were wildly successful, you made a transition into the mental health space without blinking an eye, really, and brought that success into that space. And I think that should be understood, that it wasn't, you didn't, like a lot of people may come into that route and as if you like, people with personal experience of psychological distress or significant distress, they're advocates for, but that's not necessarily what happened here, which is why I think your story is very interesting. Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to say that and contextualize it.
No, you're very kind. And yeah, we have had a modicum of success in the past. Our place in the food chain really was, we would launch a show, an event. We'd run it for 3 to 4 years. We started with a portfolio of shows in South Africa, moved back to Europe, the Middle East, and elsewhere. But after 3 or 4 years, we would then sell or divest of that particular single event or portfolio to the big exhibition organisers in the world. And as you very kindly say, we have had some success. We've exited over 26 times, either individual events or portfolios of events. And the business has been incredibly good to us and great fun. One of the things I'd like to add on that is, even though I'm a one-trick pony, in other words, I do events, every 3 or 4 years, I would change industry sector. So one time it might be in Formula One or dentistry or pharmaceuticals. So I know a little bit about lots of those industries, but not a great deal about any of them. And actually, you're quite right. It was probably off the back of one of our biggest successes, which was 6 years ago. And we sold a large event called Internet Retailing to Clarion, which is it's the third biggest organizer on the planet. And it was a very good sale. And so we were, euphoric, as you can imagine. We'd worked very hard. This particular event we'd owned for 6 years, not 3 or 4. And it was a particularly good exit. So we were celebrating massively. In fact, Mark decided that he was going to opt out. He bought himself a piece of land in Exuma in the Bahamas. He chose on the beach and was building his little dream beach hut. And he lives in the States, as do his children. And we were celebrating that. And it was at this point that his daughter, Caroline, and her then boyfriend, who was also called Mark, attempted to take their lives. They had a pact, a suicide pact. And it was in a work environment. And hindsight's everything, but it was clearly, if anyone had been if anyone had delved in, it would have been spotted. It was on the intranet. People had been aware of it. And tragically, I'll give you, tragically, Mark, the boyfriend, Caroline's boyfriend, very, very sadly managed to succeed and then took his own life. And Caroline, fortunately, did not succeed. And just quickly, 5 years now later on, Caroline's fine and doing well, with her condition. But, imagine the ramifications of that pact, both for Mark's family, and Mark, obviously, I love the boy. He was an amazing young man. So it was at that point, really, that Mark and I said, well, if that could have been stopped somehow, then, we've done 30 years of business networking. When we started, people were at sort of junior management, and now they were C-suite people. So our Rolodesk, if you like, was massive across multiple industry sectors and across the globe. And we sat down in a park and came up with the idea of MADWorld. And MAD, we were looking for an acronym, but we also wanted to call it MADWorld. We wanted to, with no reference to people who had a medical a mental illness or condition at all, but we wanted people, we lived in a mad bloody world, and we needed to address it. So we chose workplace wellbeing because we definitely felt that was the one area where we could help, because of our business connections. And MAD became the acronym, or MAD is the acronym for Make a Difference. 5 years have gone by, and all the rest of it. And Caroline, whenever I give the welcome address, whether we're in New York, Singapore, London, and we're taking it now to Malaysia as well, Caroline's story always comes out. She's totally behind what we do, and it's Mark's passing 6-year anniversary this year, and we always celebrate that. So that's where we are, and I'm delighted to say now that we go out to, I think it's now just short of 50,000 employers around the world. We share insights, future trends, best practice, worst practice, those that are starting, and what does that look like? Those that have strategies and maybe want to implement or better or more sustainable ones, and everything in between. And if I may, I'll just take a few minutes just to tell you our 4 driving ambitions, goals for this. Number 1 is we want to eradicate stigma, the stigma of mental health in the workplace forever. And the ultimate aim would be for any employee anywhere in the world, no matter it's in an office, in a construction site, on a stage, in a sports field, anyone could put their hand up for and say, I'm having a bad day, a bad mental health day, without fear of, weakness or reprimand or any stigma. So that's ultimately our objective. The second one is to do that, we believe we needed to get buy-in from the top of every company, no matter what the size. We need them to commit money over time, like any transformation. I compare it to a CRM or a computer change system. There's no point in C-suite doing it and no one else. Everyone's got to buy into it. So to create incremental, sustainable, but systemic culture and DNA change in an organization, it has to be top down, bottom up, and sort of like thaw that frozen middle so everyone is into it. The third thing is about training. There's a lot of great champions, advocates, mental health first aiders, which are great and wonderful. But for me, I want every single employee on the planet to have some form of induction, mental health awareness training, what I call empathy training, for themselves, to spot the signs themselves, the attention to prevention, to spot that in others, and also to be able to signpost themselves when they feel it, or signpost others to seek assistance, diagnostics, guidance, whatever it might be. And then the fourth one, which is probably the one that I love the most because it's really been my bag, which is all about brand marketing. And I think that's why we have the problem now, which is if you look at mental health as a brand, it has such a bad rap. You look at physical health and you imagine Nike or Adidas stores with, fit men, women and children of different creeds, cultures, ethnicities and all the rest of it. And that's great. Look at dental health. It's exactly those same images, but with someone with ting in their teeth. But as soon as you utter the word mental health, it's these pictures of holding heads in hand or pictures of the scream or whatever it is, which is just wrong. Because mental health is, looking after one's mental health is just wonderful. So we want to change the narrative and the imagery. We're working with Movember, the biggest mental health male charity on the planet, and Getty Images all over the world to change their library entirely. Every photographer who works for Getty Images now has to submit new images so that when you put mental health in, it's not those pictures. It's pictures of people happy. So whenever you go to anything...
That's what mental health is. So you haven't set yourself very large targets. You're a bit of an underachiever, really, aren't you, Simon? I think you really need to sort of push yourself there.
I think I want to leave you with one thought on what we're trying to do. And I think this would have changed the world. Since the age of 2, every single one of us were taught by our parents to clean our teeth twice a day, to look after our dental health. There's even buttons on brushes now that shows you how long you have to do it for. And they teach you how to do it. So that's 4 minutes a day since the age of 3 years old. Well, if only we could do that with our mental health and had been taught that, we'd all be in a better place. And that's really where I want to take brand mental health.
Sure. I mean, I think it's interesting in the workplace because in some ways, and I think it has significantly changed and it still needs a lot of change. The workplace was a place which could make you ill in terms of psychological distress and encourage behaviours. You mentioned one sort of industry in particular, which I think is well known for that and is making big strides at the moment, which is the legal profession. And it's, I think, pretty common knowledge that you can be a well-balanced individual going into it, and you may not be as well and balanced when you come out of it because of the work ethic. And so thinking about that sort of thing, is it not a hard sell to that industry to say, well, you need to change your practices? So you talked about culture. How is that? So how are you winning that one, do you think?
Well, I think, mental health and well-being in the workplace is the thing I've always maintained. And by the way, I've got to predicate this, but I am not a professional like you, Noel. I have no medical background in this space, and everything I talk to you about is from what I've heard and learned from others. But look, I feel that, without doubt, the thing about mental health is that there is no silver bullet. There is no right answer. Each and every person who has an episode of mental ill health, it's very subjective to them. And I think so if employers meet the sort of like the individual well-being needs of their employees, I think that's something that has come to the fore. And for me, one of the industries, we talk about legal profession, which I don't mean to sort of like single out, but when I first got into that, I don't know if you know a guy called Jeff McDonald, but he headed up HR really for Unilever, one of the biggest companies in the world, and with Paul Polman made massive differences in that business. But I was listening to Jeff, one of the first person I heard speak about it, And at the very end of his presentation, he mentioned a fact about the construction industry, which he had just learned that day, that, you know, health and safety about 10 years ago, if you think about health and safety, well, safety has done very well, because if you look at the construction industry now, I think, don't quote me on the year, but it was about probably 8 years ago. There's a record of anyone who dies on a building site, almost like an ombudsman, where everyone has to report into and the reason why. And the figures may be exaggerated under or over here, but I'm guessing here, but there was around about 3 people who died in that particular year in every construction site in the UK. 3 people died through suicide. Sorry, 3 people died through a safety mishap.
Yeah.
And the same year, conversely, over 330 people took their own lives on the same building site. And that stat just completely knocked me off my chair.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think, you know, we've come a long way since then, I'm delighted to say. But, you know, that's where I think everyone, you know, we work now with the biggest magic circle and the smallest legal companies and financial services company, which is also another company, another industry sector that specializes out. People are now more outspoken. So I think, you know, what does one say? I think a lot of things have happened in the legal industry. It was funny enough, I gave a talk at a legal conference the other day about this. And a lot of it came down to soft skills of management. So people used to join the legal professional in a company. And their sole aim was to bill as many hours as they could and become junior partner. Well, and so they'd start off with that. And I think that's now changing in the graduate programs that they're now bringing in, is that, number one, there's too many of them, so they can't all become partners. And number two, you know, billable hours, you know, relentlessly, week on, week out, you know, just doesn't cut it anymore. And one of the lovely stories I heard was, now what people do when a client says, because your client leads all in all businesses, but if a client says, oh, I desperately need that on Monday, people are asking, and it's a Friday night, people are asking, do you really? And if they still say yes, then what good managers and good teams are doing is then that they know the work has to be done over the weekend. So they divvy it up. I'll do Saturday, do as much as I can, and you'll do Sunday, because we have to deliver for the Monday, as opposed to one person, one partner or junior partner or clerk having to work 48 hours over the weekend to deliver to that client. So I think we're moving from stigma to solutions, is the way I like to look at it.
Yeah, I think the sort of reframing and rebranding argument is a really interesting one. And you're very kind in saying, Noel, I don't know as much as you. You're a mental health professional, but it's mental health professionals like me that got the branding wrong, quite frankly. And we did. When we say mental health in the UK, we mean mental illness. It's bonkers. It's a complete double speak, and we shouldn't use those two terms in the same breath. And we do. And I think the sort of rebranding is long overdue, so that when we say mental health, that's what we mean. Is we mean people who have lived in such a way that they promote their own health and well-being. And that doesn't mean that you're never going to get sort of psychological distress. It's bonkers. It's like the idea I'll never catch a cold just because I go to the gym. I'm sorry, folks, if you really believe that, that's not going to happen. But the chances are, if you go to the gym regularly and eat well, when you do catch a cold, it probably won't be as severe as somebody who has all sorts of other conditions.
But no, that's exactly the branding dichotomy, if you like, in that if you do brush your teeth twice a day, doesn't mean you're not going to have a cavity. Doesn't mean, you know, you might not need a brace, whatever. Same with physical health, and the same with mental health. You know, people talk about, you know, stress is a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. You know, we all get stressed at different things, but you need to rest. You need to manage. You need to, recharge. You've got to build up resilience. You know, that's what people, even sportsmen, they build up to become professional sports people. It doesn't just start. But as long as you're aware of and you have I believe, maybe correctly or incorrectly, but the 4 pillars of good mental health, tops the list always is sleep, but sleep, nutrition, exercise, and mindfulness. Mindfulness, I don't particularly, that can be lots of different things. I get my mindfulness from horse riding on the beach, which is, because I'm only thinking of my horses and me on that beach. But, I've also been known to saw wood and felt the same thing. But each to his own. But the top 3, massively important. Get good night's sleep. Really, it couldn't be more important. Eat well and in moderation with everything. Do some exercise every day. And take some time out. Really.
I think it's correct. I mean, the sort of the division between mind and body is a false division. It doesn't exist. If your mind is in distress, it means your body's in distress.
Yes.
Because your mind is your body, and any form of distress will be experienced as will have psychological impacts as well. So physical distress is psychological, etc., etc. So
how important is the tummy, Noel? Because everyone tells me that the tummy's the real brain.
Well, there's more brain matter in your gut than inside your skull. That's the point. For a long time we didn't know why SSRIs worked, and we now know it's because they get serotonin going in the gut lining more than in the brain. So there was a long time people just thought SSRIs were nonsense, but the gut is quite important in all of this. And we have several brains, the gut being one of them. The heart, interestingly, is another one. Has independent executive functioning, can make decisions for itself, very strangely. And the skin is another one, and the central nervous system is another one, and most physical actions are done autonomically, so without any thought whatsoever. So yes, all of these things I think are absolutely crucial, so you need to sort of work these things out. I'm thinking that sort of mental health in the workplace, which is sort of the area that you work in, and you're very good at sort of downplaying your expertise. I mean, I think what I do as a mental health expert is I deal with mental illness. Okay, that's what I deal with. I also do a lot of mental well-being and psychological well-being work, because prevention is always better than cure. And this thing of highlighting sort of education around psychological distress and understanding the signs of distress, and you've named them. If your sleeping patterns suddenly change, you may well be having depression or anxiety. Most people don't know that's a sign of something like that. If your eating patterns suddenly change, etc., etc. So your body will tell you something's going on, and you just need to listen to that stuff. And in the same way that if you are mindful of that stuff, you can regulate distress through your physical actions each day by getting enough sleep and rest and all that sort of stuff. So those are the fundamentals. But I'm interested in sort of how we bring that into the workplace in particular. And the workplace in particular is because I, as a mental health professional, I can tell you quite candidly that if somebody is diagnosed with depression or anxiety, the first thing I want to do is get them back to work.
Yeah.
I don't want them being off work for a long time and pathologized. And that's because socializing with other people with meaningful tasks is fundamentally therapeutic. And sticking somebody in a hospital ward is the opposite of therapeutic. That's how you make people ill, and it's the last thing in the world that we want to do. With that in mind, I'm quite keen about the approach that experts like you have, and you are an expert in the workplace, and about bringing the sort of knowledge of how to make systems work, because I do think of mental health as systemic. It's the system you're in.
I think that's really true. And look, when we first started this, we had no idea how it was going to take off, and it has. And the reason is because, first of all, we had people talking about lived experiences.
Yes.
And then we started hearing about what people are doing and what worked, and then the collaborative approach. I mean, two banks, for example, who fearlessly compete during the day for business would collaborate to share what they were doing and what works, which was just fabulous. So, you know, for me, it's about, you know, the first thing one needs to do, in my opinion, is to assess, you know, where you are. There's no point in looking, you know, just do an assessment of where your workforce is, as much as you can, a detailed assessment as you possibly can, you know. And then I think what you've then got to do is, you know, as I said earlier, though, meeting the individual needs of employees, but also ensuring there's an inclusivity, if you like, of mental health and well-being programs that, you know, people can choose. You know, one might not suit you, you know, one might want to do yoga, one might like to have massage. This is not about putting a bowl of oranges and green tea in a kitchen. It has to be, and it's not about celebrating Mental Health Awareness Week like we had last week, and the theme of nature, or any other days. It's really properly looking at changing a corporate DNA and culture from the top to the bottom, which is why I want this empathy, mental health awareness training for all. And I'll come back to that in a second because it's really important. I've got one fabulous project which we're just about to launch. But I think also, you know, there's a sort of like, there's a skills revolution going on as well now, where, you know, the link between, you know, people, leadership, talent, development, training, well-being, all wrapped up into one, I think is massively important. And then frankly, coming out of this is the future of work. You know, lots of people now say, you know, what is it? You know, is your job good for you, or is it good for them, if you like? You know, I think, you know, you could you could sort of like deep dive a little bit more. You could talk about data-driven well-being, the why, the how, the what, the who, or you could take a segmented approach. You could support, you know, I mean, particularly now, actually, I think, you know, we've got to look at people who are coming back in with new ailments, if you like long COVID is a massive issue, which, you know, people are going to have to look. And then the final thing is the link between conflict management, toxic workplaces, and well-being, and how we can address those and avoid those. But all of this, Noel, every single part of this comes to be, for me, if I have an organization of 1,000 people that work for me, and as part of them joining the company, they have this is our mission, this is what we do. But as part of this, if we had I don't know, a 20-minute video with a syllabus of some form, educating people on mental health awareness, both of themselves and of their others, and how in that organization they should be signposting, whether it be to your GP, to your EAP, to your counsellor, to whoever it would be. If everyone is aware of that, how on earth can we not then recognize when someone is, you know, when someone is not, you know, being their normal, although that can be hidden a lot, but someone not, you don't think people are being themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think the move into this sort of awareness stuff, and particularly the mental health first aid, is really significant and really important, and it's important to hold people to account to it as well, and it's not a tick boxing exercise. Coming back to the sort of workplace itself and the culture in the workplace, and just thinking about how that one thing that strikes me as extraordinary, and I think it's partly my profession's fault, because I'm a nerd on mental illness. That's what I am. I'm fascinated by this stuff, and I'm fascinated by diversity around all of those things. I'm not fascinated enough in public, I think, about the people who sort of have mental well-being and mental fitness, as I think it's was it Harry, or no, it's his brother, one of the princes.
Both of them do. I mean, and the former princesses as well. I mean, yeah, their Heads Together campaign, their shout.
Yeah, that whole thing about mental fitness, which I think is much more effective in terms of mental health, genuinely. And I'm sort of a great advocate of that approach. And what's interesting, and I think this is part of the professional mental health world, it's our responsibility here, is I think a lot of employers may be put off doing mental health work because they hear what I say about mental health when I'm really talking about mental illness. And actually, if I start talking about mental health with employers, what I'm talking about is efficiency and productivity. Because if you get people well, working well together in groups, that will make them well, psychologically and physiologically, without a doubt. We know that. And the hard evidence for that is this last year. Because we've taken people out of those informal support structures, they've suffered.
Yeah.
Once you put people back in, and again, there's an interesting sort of almost split personality in some way, or some sort of weird disconnect going on. Because if any sizable organisation will have its own occupational health processes, and somebody's ill, you're sent to occupational health, and mostly what occupational health's job, and it should be, is you filter people back into the workplace in a manageable way. That's primarily what will make people well, is getting them back to their life. You know, and so you might need specialist tools to enable them to get well enough to go back into life, but that's ultimately what you're aiming to do. And yet somehow that key message is lost, that the workplace is probably one of the best health providers that we've got. And I'm intrigued, and I wonder if this is still the case, whether sort of employers are still seeing the case whereby if they have somebody who's mentally ill, they think they should be treated outside of the workplace. Whereas I think they need to be treated inside the workplace and kept in situ and dealt with in that way. So I don't know if you've got experience of talking to employers about that and where people are going around all of that stuff.
I think everything you said is incredibly interesting. And I feel that there's that whole spectrum. So you're someone who has a mental illness, a long-term medicated, potentially mental illness, that spectrum, it is, I'm not best placed to comment. I suppose from my perspective, the lower end down the scale. So if we're talking about PTSD, bipolar, schizophrenia, all that sort of stuff, that's what I be unmedicated, in lay terms, would say the higher end. At the sort of like the bottom end of the spectrum, which is anxiety, stress, grief, or anything like that. My idea is to sort of like to try and prevent more people not having those situations, but being able to manage it. So the attention to prevention is really important to me, and those that have it at that stage to look after. And I think at that stage, you're absolutely right. There are other, things that have come up over the last 4 years. So, for example, domestic violence. Yes. One thing, what's the worst thing you could do with someone who's suffering from a victim of domestic violence is send them home.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
The office is immense. So, absolutely, in that case, I think for me is, the whole. Where does it start and stop with employers? That's, I suppose, where is that fine line?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that is the next natural question, isn't it? Like schools say the same thing. What do you expect us to do? We're here to teach you to read and write, and then suddenly you expect all of this. And I imagine there's something like that going on for employers as well. They're like, well, what do you expect from us?
Yeah, no, I think that's true. So the way we've managed to circumnavigate that, not even navigate or circumnavigate, where we've literally bulldoze through that is.
I can't imagine you're that subtle about it.
No, but I mean,
I'm sure you're diplomatic, but you're sort of like, oh, hang on a minute.
Not in this case, because at the end of the day, what business, big business is, small business, any business needs to be is commercially viable and profitable. That's what they strive for. Yeah. So to put across the business case was the most important thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think we have to.
For them to take notice and write a check out and do that return on investment and why it's worth doing this was then. But now, as a result of this past 14 months, it's even more about talent retention. It's suddenly now looking after our people. There's lots of small and big companies. HSBC is one of the biggest employers on the world. They've now introduced something called the Healthy Human System. And I'm not going to knock them because they've done it, but why it hasn't happened many, many years before, why have we got to look after our healthy humans now and think that is a good thing, is only a good thing. So don't get me wrong, but everyone needs to take note of that. It's almost ironic that your best salesman, okay, is once they do a deal, let's say they do a 50 grand deal, and that's a marvelous deal, then arguably you should say, right, off you go and have a nice weekend, relax, get well done, as opposed to get back on the phone and do another one. That whole sort of recovery, I think, is also, and people's, we've changed as human beings. We've changed. It used to be a badge of honor to go down. In my day, when I started, after work, anyone who could drink 5 pints of Guinness, smoke half of, fags, 20 fags, and almost, have not sleep that night, but get in the office at 7. That was a badge of honor. Well, we've learned from that. So let's try and do that mentally as well, as the way I view it. I
think that's true. And I think workplace culture is shifting in terms of the things that were disastrous for sort of health.
And particularly next gen. No, one of the things I love is that, I've said to you, we're in workplace wellbeing. There's a huge amount of work that needs being done from young people, adolescents, teenagers. We only do 25 to 65 at workplace because that's where we really think we can make a difference. Again, longevity, menopause, separation, loneliness after work, huge problems. But we don't feel, we can do that. But, at the end, the next generation for me, so these new people coming through to start their work or their careers in workplaces, they know so much more than we do. And I'm delighted. And I'm really pleased to see that most of them are, taking time out to look after themselves mentally. And
I think it's interesting. One of the sort of more startling statistics that I happen to know is that if somebody takes off time for mental illness currently, 90% of them won't come back. So you've lost them. So that's huge. And I think after this year, you can't afford to do that as an employer. No. I mean, we couldn't afford to do it before, but you certainly can't afford to do it now because people are coming back having experienced across the board psychological distress. As you say, the more common form of it, such as anxiety and depression. But the anxiety and depression can become habit forming unless we have good ways of dealing with it, and that's the sort of ticking time bomb here. That if employers don't take this on, what you will find is that these things will become embedded because they're behavioural responses, and if we are what we do, and if we are behaving in ways that are anxious and depressed, that is what will be confirmed. So employers really need to do that. And coming back to your earlier point about assessment, I think that's absolutely crucial. Is it still the case? I mean, it used to be the case that people was sort of really worried about the cans of worms opening up and all that sort of stuff. Are people still, is that still a fear, or have we got over that sort of?
Yeah, I think if you talk to, I went to this legal conference I told you, and one of the guys that was firing questions at the end of the session was an employment lawyer, and saying, he blamed it. He said, "What about all those people who, they daren't sign off a chitty for mental health, the medical chit, because it was basically endless. If you signed a chitty off for a broken leg, you knew it would be X amount of time and they'd come back." And he even mentioned it, which I ripped into him, about the bad back syndrome. That, he's had a bad back, so I'll take some time off. And I just looked at him and I said, well, of course I understand that. But at the end of the day, what about the millions of people who are just screaming out for some assistance, for some guidance, for something? And you're worried about the people who are going to feign it. But it is, no question, that sort of like bad back syndrome, may happen. But for me, let's look after.
I think it's unlikely. I mean, I sort of my experience is that presenteeism is much more of a problem in mental health than absenteeism, and it just gets worse and worse. And the interesting thing, if you think about systems, they're either healthy or unhealthy, and often that's reflected by the people who bubble up to the top of the system. And it's interesting at the moment that one of the sort of, again, the shocking statistics is that the highest rate of growth of very severe long-term mental illnesses such as bipolar and personality disorders, borderline in particular, are happening in the C-suite.
Really? I had no idea.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And that's where the largest uptake is at the moment. And I guess organisations need to notice that.
Yeah.
That they need to notice what's happening, because if those people will, and you've touched upon it, and we don't have time to go into it. We might come back to it another time. It's one of my sort of soapboxes is about quality of services within the private sector for mental health, because I think the employment lawyer has something of a point that there's a lot of private sector providers of mental health services that also just think, oh, right, I've got somebody for life now.
Yeah, they're concerned about
because the treatments are wholly ineffective, particularly sort of treatments for the C-suite, such as sending people into a psych ward. Might be a nice hospital that you charge a lot of money for per week, but it's still going to make people ill, not well. Which is why I'm interested in sort of well spaces in work, because I think, you know, that's where we need to be, definitely, in terms of sort of educating people. We are sort of at the end of the time, unfortunately, Simon. I told you we'd go like
that. Went quickly.
We would just get into the interesting bits of the conversation, then have to finish. I'm often told by people, your show's too long, an hour. No, it's not long enough really for these issues at all. So just before we go, tell us what Make a Difference are doing this year, how people can get hold of you, what sort of what's the plan this year for your mob, and how can people go along and be part of it, really?
Well, look, with the summits we always do in October around World Mental Health Day. This year it's on October the 21st, which is a Thursday in central London.
And that'll be a live event, hopefully.
Fully live, fully live, and in central London, in Houndsditch, the venue that we always use. It's a one-day event. Anyone who wants to come, just go to our website, which is makeadifference.events. We also have a media arm, makeadifference.media, and so we're, you know, regularly every Thursday we put out insights, future trends, best practice, worst practice, new tech, and all that sort of stuff coming in, which is run by our resident guru, Claire Farrow, who's wonderful. We also have a new event that we're launching at the end of February at Olympia, a big trade show which encompasses mental, physical, social, financial, and environmental health, well-being in the workplace as a whole. And I'd just like to say one more thing, Noel. If any of your people, any of your audience would like to come, I would be happy and willing to give them a substantial discount on the fees to come in. I'll go as far. I'll give a 50% discount to anyone.
That's why this company is successful, because he knows how to sell it to you. And mental well-being and mental wellness needs to be sold. It really does. Mental health professionals like me have done a dreadful job of packaging it, and I'm so grateful to people like yourself, Simon, that get us to sort of rethink these things, because that's how we're going to win this one. I sort of can't sort of advocate enough for Make a Difference. They're a great organisation that really sort of walk the walk as well as talk it. And I'm sort of particularly interested in the sort of media side of things, because I think you're spot on with that. That we need to get into the media and find out what makes them tick, and how we can get these sort of positive mental wellness messages out there. So again, I think it's a brilliant innovation that you have, Simon.
You're very kind. I'd like to leave you with one thought, if I may, which has always struck me. It was from that very first talk from Mr. Jeff McDonald that I credit this story, but it's always stuck with me, which is every time someone tells their story about a lived experience, even when people think it's not important or in some ways menial, every time someone talks about an episode of mental health that they've experienced, he says it's like sending out a lifeboat into an ocean full of people who are drowning and just waiting for one of those stories, and they're like a lifeboat for people to hang on to, on the hope that one day someone will be able to say that without fear of stigma or reprimand. And it's always struck me. So any time I will give time to any person on the planet who wants to tell me their story, because it's for those stories that will save others, and that makes me very happy.
Brilliant. Great way to end. You stay with us, Simon. I'm going to sort of end the show. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you again next week. But for now, it's bye-bye. I hope you all have a lovely evening and week.